Because one of the keys is to make sure that you have a workforce that can add value. In the age of the internet, when companies can locate anywhere, the most important thing is to find some place. Where there is security, so there's no conflict, where there's rule of law, and the people are highly skilled. And if you have those three things, then people will invest. Yes, go ahead. Question: Good afternoon, Mr. President. I'm from Thailand. And now I work on the anti. Human trafficking issue in Thailand and neighboring country. So today, I would like to ask you if you were a Rohingya. Which country would you prefer to live with and why? Thank you so much. President Obama, that's an interesting question. Let me speak more broadly, and then I'll answer your question. We were talking earlier about what's required for Myanmar to succeed. I think one of the most important things is to put an end to discrimination. Against people because of what they look like or what their faith is. And the Rohingya have been discriminated against significantly, and that's part of the reason they're fleeing. I think if I were a Rohingya, I would want to stay where I was born. I'd want to stay in the land where my parents had lived. But I'd want to make sure that my government was protecting me. And that people were treating me fairly. That's what I'd want. And that's why it's so important, I think. As part of the democratic transition, to take very seriously this issue of how the Rohingya are treated. One of the things about discriminating against people or treating people differently is, by definition, that means that people will treat you differently, and you never know when you will find yourself in a situation in which you are a minority, where you are vulnerable, where you're not being treated fairly. And right now, obviously, our focus is on making sure that those who are being subject to human trafficking and are in some cases right now, still in a very perilous situation out in the open sea, that they are relocated. I want to commend Indonesia and Malaysia for their willingness to take on thousands of these displaced persons. The United States, as part of our refugee process, will take some. We put over $100 million over the last several years in Burma to make sure that minority groups including the Rohingya, are protected against. But, ultimately, this is going to be a great test for the democracy of the future. Not just in Burma and Myanmar, but in areas all throughout the country. When I was, and I know this directly because when I was young and I was living in Indonesia, there were times where there were anti-Chinese riots that were very violent and vicious. And, in fact, sometimes the Chinese Indonesians were treated very similarly to how Jewish Europeans were treated in Europe, and subject to stereotypes and resentments. And the truth of the matter is, one of the reasons that Singapore, I mentioned earlier, has been successful, is that it has been able to bring together people who may look different, but they all think of themselves as part of Singapore. And that has to be a strength, not a weakness. But that requires leadership and government being true to those principles. To their credit, the Indonesian government when I was growing up was very good about not discriminating on the base of religion despite the fact that it was 98% Muslim. And I think that the tolerance towards other faiths historically in Indonesia has been part of what's contributed to progress there. You haven't seen the same kind of sectarian animosity that you've seen in parts of the Middle East. But the one thing I know is countries that divide themselves on racial or religious lines, they do not succeed. They do not succeed. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2 is nations that suppress. Their women do not succeed. They don't succeed. Not only is it bad because half of the country is not successful because they're not getting education and opportunity. But it's women who teach children, which means the children are less educated. If you're not teaching the moms. So there are some, each country is different. But there are some rules if you look at development patterns around the world that are pretty consistent. And those are two pretty good rules. Don't divide yourself on religious and ethnic lines and racial lines. And don't discriminate against women. If you do those two things, you're not guaranteed success, but at least you're not guaranteed failure. I've got time for one more, two more. I definitely don't have time for 30 more. Question: Good afternoon, Mr. President. I'm from Malaysia. I work at Department of Irrigation and Drainage in Malaysia. My Isiali theme is environmental sustainability. And my question for you is, what have you learned about leadership and life as being? President, in comparison to what you have might not learned if you were not a president? President Obama, as president you I think probably what makes this job unique is that you are the ultimate decision maker. So there are other people who work as hard as I do. My staff works very, very hard. They're just as smart or smarter than I am. They care just as much or more than I do. They have wonderful qualities. But the one thing as president is that ultimately there's nobody you can pass it on to. Harry Truman, one of our best presidents, once said, "The buck stops here." He meant at his desk. And it's true. And usually by the time a decision comes to my desk, you know that it's a very hard problem because if it was easy somebody else would have solved it. And so probably the thing that I uniquely have had to learn in the presidency that is I hadn't learned as well in other jobs is the ability to look at all the information that you have, listen to all the advice that's there. And the different viewpoints that may exist about an issue, to try to make a decision based not on what is easiest. But what I think is the best long-term solution, and then feel comfortable in the knowledge that I may be wrong. And that there will be significant consequences if I am wrong. to have the courage then maybe 6 months later or a year later to admit this didn't work, and then to try something new. But being willing to take responsibility for making hard decisions. Not be paralyzed because you know there are big consequences to them, and then being able to adapt based on the evidence as to whether it worked or not, I think, is the most important lesson I've learned. And that's not something that you have to, is just unique to being president. I think in whatever your job is, you should be willing to take responsibility for getting the best information. To listening to everybody. But then you have to make a decision and understand then that you have to continue to evaluate it. And I think that that's been very important. The second lesson, which is something that you just learn more of as president. But all of you have already learned in some ways in your work, is to surround yourself with the best people. Your most important job is to create a team of people, some of whom have talents that you don't have. To make up for your weaknesses, and then to want to make them better, and make them successful. Because if they're successful, then the team is successful. So you're not a good leader if you don't want somebody who is smarter than you because you think. Oh, well, maybe they'll shine more than you do. Then you're not a very good leader because your team won't succeed. So I'm always looking for who are people who are much smarter than me. Or much more organized than I am, or much better analysts. And my job then is just to be able to weave them together so they're all working together effectively. And if you're doing that, then you're a good leader. And you should be constantly thinking, how can I help this person do their jobs even better? And the good news is, if you do that and people recognize that you care about them being successful, then they'll work harder, and they'll want to do even better. And they'll appreciate you because they know that you're helping them. Instead of trying to keep them subordinate to you. Last question. And all the men should put down their hands because it's a woman's turn. No, all the guys have to put their hands down. This young lady in the yellow right here, right in the corner, right here. Question, thank you, President. Good afternoon, sir. I'm from Vietnam. Currently. I'm working for the Da Nang Institute for Socio-Economic Development. And first of all, I would like to say thank you to you for giving us this. Unique opportunity to come to the United States and to meet you today. My question for you is, what is your opinion about disputes and China's action in the East Sea, or so-called the South China Sea? President Obama, well, as I already mentioned, what has allowed all of Asia to prosper over the last 3 decades, including China, is there's been relative peace and stability. Freedom of navigation, freedom of commerce. And all of that has been underwritten. All of that has been because there have been certain rules that everybody has followed.